Good evening. As usual, I'm going to introduce our guests, Efren and Christina, 09 Amit. They have a very complicated name. No one understands why they have such a complicated name, but I know something about that. Well, it's a pleasure to introduce them, but I could easily fall in the trap of endlessly listing the biographical relations that has linked me to both of them. First, separately, and very soon together throughout a couple of decades. They are members of an incredible generation of young, talented Madrid architects with whom I have had the honor of and pleasure of working together, first as students, later as collaborators, then as teaching together, in addition to several events, exhibitions, and installations along the years. I think that pointing out the unique characteristics of Efren and Christina's careers in themselves provides for a more interesting introduction than sharing a number of funny or serious gossips and anecdotes. So I will try to make an introduction that will be my interpretation of their work, and let's see how they react to it. So to focus on the designer's qualities, I'd like to point to in particular. Persistence, or for a lack of a more precise definition, stubbornness, and drawing skills. I think these two are amazingly important, and you will find these two characteristics in Efren and Christina in extreme conditions. I insist on the only two qualities that I consider essential. There are other qualities for an architect that are important but not essential. In order to become a real architect, are precisely these two. To be able to sketch with great sensibility ideas that are in a state of formation, becoming forms through the drawings themselves, but also becoming properly ideas and not just wishful thinking. And at the same time, being enough stubborn in character to be able to maintain these ideas, forms, to bring them alive through a really long process of questioning from everyone, from different angles, until the moment that these ideas and these first drawings become a reality, are presented to the citizens of a specific site. There are limits or nuances to being stubborn and having a resilient character, which are different. No? The first is like being close-minded. I understand the word in English is very similar to tozudo in Spanish. No? Just because it's to be rigid, and we all know that being rigid is to be exposed. You are more fragile. The second, resilience or resilient character, that is now more in fashion, I would say, is politically elastic and therefore is confirmative, adaptative, but blunt. I prefer to maintain the persistence or stubbornness because I think is the real quality that we need as an architect. That knowing perfectly well that it doesn't sound like very polite. But let me say that no one of the artists we admire the last 2 centuries have ever compromised a single dot or line of their work, and this is why they are artists. And it's exactly the same what happens with architecture. Being resilient, politically correct, is directly to drive your career into the, let's say, the corporate thing, compromising, and becoming less and less interesting. Efren and Christina have consequently built very few buildings, being among the most skillful, or if not the most skillful of a generation grown in Spain that in other cases that many of you know, has been able to construct a body of buildings with small practices because of the system of public competitions that till a few years ago was normal in our country. However, they have revealed a level of rigor and quality, sometimes sending proposals, especially in competitions that were outside of the rules or requirements in ways that could be easily understood as provocations. But seen in, let's say, in a broader perspective, this attitude allowed them to construct a body of unbuilt work of impressive quality. Efren, and you will see it, I mean, no doubt. Efren and Cristina possess an impressive provocative capacity that opened for them frontiers and made them somehow as popular or even more popular in places like Korea than in Madrid. No? So sacrificing the opportunity that Spain was giving to all their colleagues, they received some much more international recognition in a media world that was demanding more extreme visions than adapted proposals. This lack of adaptation was not due to a lack of interest in local conditions at all, but to an extreme interest in local and global contexts, positioning them close to exuberance and extremes through their hyper-adaptation, I would say. No? At least I think this is my understanding. You will see what they produce, and we will discuss this later if you want. This brings me to the second characteristic. Efren and Cristina possess extreme drawing skills that allow them to perceive simultaneously many layers of reality that demand responses in terms of design. Because to draw well is to see well, to see through, to have a scanner that sees the virtual and the physical realities at the same time, and to see them folding into millions of potential realities inside the actual. To be able to see in time also, back and forth, and to see in geological times, and with a projective and futuristic gaze that needs expression. And this means to see differently and act differently. And it has repercussions, as you can remember in many science fiction films, where strange people are just receiving information that others don't. Now you become isolated, anxious, even violent, but you have, because you have to create your own artificial nature, rare new species. You have to create your own desert to pass through if you want to become a creator. As Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche pointed out, according to him, to create your identity, you have to pass through different stages in life. First, the camel, the spirit that piles on wherever it can while crossing the desert. Then becoming the lion, the spirit that fights against false values in order to find his or her own place. And then eventually becoming the child, symbolizing this notion, the child, the beginning of a new life that constructs a new world, and that is also radical, as radical are the children. They are not so nice as in the films. Sometimes they are very destructive. So I don't know exactly if Efren and Cristina became in previous lives lions or camels, but I'm sure that they have been crossing their own desert, creating their own rare species and constructing one by one, colleague by colleague, student by student, client by client, their community of similars, a circle of brotherhood that has given them the opportunity to grow, build, teach, and become the architects they are nowadays, that will astonish all of you who are not familiar with their work, and will astonish also with their stubbornness and amazing skills. Please join me welcoming Cristina and Efren.
Hello. Yeah, is this working? And that lights can be switched off? No? Okay. So now I am blind. And I can say thank you very much, Iñaki. My mother is not here, so she didn't listen to your words. And she would have said, yes, you're stubborn, stubborn, stubborn. I agree. We are very stubborn. So thank you anyway. Very beautiful presentation, too much. It's our friend, you've noticed. Well, we always start explaining certain things about what you are going to see. Maybe you know our work, some of you, yes, some of you not. But We are going to explain certain projects, works done by us, also books, and well, we are going to do it through two different points. One is our work in the academia, so teaching, and the other one is in our work in our office, so in the practice, in the real practice. And also, we always start saying that in 1 hour, we are going to explain things that should be explained like deeper or more clearly. So we are going to give for granted like certain concepts, and it will some concepts will contain certain simplifications. Sorry for that. We hope that you are able to read in between the lines. Where's the so is it not working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Is that one?
Okay. This is new technologies. We started with the slides. So although we are going to tackle the concepts through the theory, as I said, is made primarily from the practice. The practice that is linked, as I said, also with the teaching, but we do think that is by means of practicing in our office and doing buildings, although we have constructed certainly only few, is the way in which we understand the architecture. Well, we are also, well, this is something that maybe is not so relevant, but we are teaching in the AA in London since several years ago, and you are going to see some projects done by our students, like this one, along the presentation also. Always the name of the student, or if it is a student work of our student, is in the down part of the images. And well, before starting, we need to warn you about the images and projects that you are going to see and the thoughts related with them, because there will be a lot of very strange images and outputs, mainly done by us, all of them, not this one, but you will see. And they are not a goal in themselves. They are a way of understanding the world around us, our way of understanding the world around us, as a kind of endless array of differing cultural and material entities, patterns, habits, and routines. And these strange things, this oddness, this rare new species, here is something other, is the record and the attempt to see individuation as a continuing project. And maybe, just maybe, one of the greatest challenges of our world that is increasingly generic, monocultural, and familiar. Then we could ask ourselves, can this individuality reside in qualities other than the arbitrary differentiation? Or can we be committed to the design and production of knowledge while being extremely specific with our outputs and intensely connected with the world around us here and now, and also being critical with it? So possible answers to these questions hopefully can be found during these coming minutes. And well, as I said, today we are not going to explain the projects and buildings, but only the most speculative aspects that are related directly with the concept of third natures. That is this book that was published recently in London in last January, and is the second part of another book that we published in 2004 entitled Breathable.
Well, this book, Third Natures, is a publication that accompanied the exhibition of the same title that was held as well in the Architectural Association last winter. And that gathers our work since we started 15 years ago. There is something that we wanted to do with this book, basically, and that is that basically during the last years we have been constantly heard from our friends, our students, and our colleagues, that despite the fascinating nature of some of the materials that you're going to see, some of the drawings and models and so on, it was it is, not it was, it is still difficult to understand the origin of all these materials, you know, models, shapes, all kind of strange things that are coming out of our practice. Some of the people refer to them as fantasies, or even as coming from an outer planet. And well, the book somehow was the piece that was, missing from the puzzle, that is trying somehow to construct a framework and to make understandable all these things, together. Third Natures, a micropedia, offers a conceptual framework to understand this strange and apparently personal world, and to be able to go beyond the fascination created by the special nature of the projects. More than a catalog, our first intention was just doing this kind of old books about big drawings. The publication is a really big one. It's a big format one. And secondly, our intention was to use it as a navigational tool to enter in this strange and bizarre universe of projects through drawings, photographs, and writings in the form of an encyclopedia. And that's an important word today. Is going to be an important word today in the presentation, or rather, in the reduced version and the younger sister, the micropedia. So in the book, there are not only projects, but also concepts and thoughts whose aim is to construct altogether, as the classical encyclopedias, a system of human knowledge.
Then, if you, for example, open the book under the letter P, you could find one of our last projects that is called Portable Gardens, and it consists of a series of garden temple vehicles. And here, well, as along the book, all the drawings are really tools consciously thought for the project to be developed and represented. And in this case, the collection of paradises are each Sunday through different locations in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And as a friend said, the book takes the form of a micropedia, a term taken from the original British encyclopedia that had a three-part structure. One is a huge volume, collection of volumes that is constructed by long articles, long descriptions. Another one is the propedia, that is the hierarchical outline of knowledge. And the small one, the micropedia, is a collection of short articles meant for a quick fact-checking. If you are interested in one, you can go to the Macropedia and discover more things.
You all know probably that Diderot and D'Alembert's encyclopedia was based on an attempt to compile of all human knowledge, ordering and classifying it through a series and then the choice of a series of terms, ordered in the form of an evolved dictionary. Instead of just presenting their meaning, the meaning of the words, and their etymology, these primitive encyclopedias began to present them as small articles of monographic essays using a complex system of cross-references. Words were, therefore, doors to the unknown and yet to discover, exploratory tools to navigate the immensity of the world out there. And then, under the letter R,
you can find rooms around a garden. So, opening the Micropedia, this is Giner de los Ríos Foundation, that was the entry to a competition, and is our last constructed building. And, well, now it's finished, and at the end of this lecture, we will show you more things about it. Therefore, what this architectural book is offering, in a way, is the state of the art, so what we actually know about our own world of projects and interests, and partially what might be nowadays, or how we understand nowadays the role of our discipline. The materials in the book, no matter their origin, our projects, fragments of articles by us and other authors, also captions extracted from other works, are treated in the same way and carefully placed under different words, often used in our own particular and personal weird vocabulary. Then we would like that this presentation would be something similar to the action of opening this book, this encyclopedia, strolling through the pages and not trying to understand every single thing or every single project, but understanding this combination of concepts and projects as cultural constructs. And, well, we are going to start in the letter S, So architects normally we reclaim space as the main subject of our discipline. And yes, we also were one more of these people that use the word, such that we always explain that these words, such as objects or things, if you touch it too much, they are spoiled because of, in this case, because of the broad and intense use of it. We admit, we understand that the space is a difficult term and it has like a high number of linguistic difficulties because of the broad meaning and the broad wide semantic field, and of course because of the extremely wide range of conflicting usages. And we can no longer speak without confusion about the space. Because to what space are we referring to? What are we dealing with when we are reclaiming a space as a working field for architecture? And what is the tradition of this term in the field of architecture?
So for us, the word space has a condition that is inherently linked to a non-passive character. That's an important thing, right? Because the space necessarily for us emerges from an interrelated combination of perception and construction of the scene. So that, the experience of this space is for us at the same time active and passive. So with this term, we want to surpass the meanings of both the two main roots associated with the term in modern times, in the modern movement. Firstly, they commonly associated with texts such as Space, Time and Architecture by Siegfried Giedion, completely abstract and linked to mathematics and physics, basically, and deeply rooted in the modernistic hygienic approach. And secondly, the experiential one that is derived primarily from psychology and psychopathology in the 30s and developed under the strong influence of Heidegger that basically links materiality, construction processes, and perception to the live and experience space of every single individual. Then, for us, space, as you can see here, is not anymore this kind of blank, empty, and infinite vast space, the white canvas of the modernity, but could be better defined as a complex interwoven network of interrelationships, a complex place where an immense amount of interrelationship between different agents are overlapped. Let's say that opposed to a purely passive concept of reception, space is for us presented then as a space of intermediation. Is the experience of ourselves being part, as in these wonderful paintings, being part of a situation and the permanent construction as a changing set of interrelationships with other biotic and non-biotic entities. This changing set of interrelationships is that is constantly redefined here and now with our actions, being perceived by us but being constructed by us at the same time is what we usually call third natures.
But then, if the space is a phenomenon of interaction, it would be necessary to define, first of all, who are the actors, and in this mutual set of relations. So, who is the people, and who are at the same time guests and actors of these third natures?
So, let's turn the attention to ourselves for a while, right? As with many other agents, our discipline has had serious difficulties to integrate us, humans, beyond the usual abstract, generic, and managerial characterizations such as, client, users, or perceivers, based on either the pure functional or the passive role of each of the actors. And you will see today how our work is really contextual, extending this notion farther on from the physical context, which is the typical way of looking at context, to a wider and more specific meaning. You're seeing in the image, right? The context for us is more could be more associated lately with a group of people or as a culture. Let's say within a specific culture instead of thinking about the physical place or physical location. Let's say with a common identity, with the material world of these people, their objects, the interrelationships that they're establishing with technology, even their visual common culture. But it's hard to find, obviously. We are speaking, as you saw, about subcultures, social groups, and this kind of micro kind of pockets of small communities. But it's hard to find this kind of social groups on the sidewalk, a kind of entity, that acts collectively as a person and that even can be seen. It's really difficult to see these kind of things, but for us are a way of representing, the different trends and different lifestyles and different cultures that now they are still present in our worlds, in our cultures, in our societies. We are still interested in contemporary forms as one of the most intense and genuine products of our culture. Why? Because they constitute at the same time a record and a critique of our society and a real attempt to build an alternative to the codes, customs, and dominant material worlds. Are in fact many societies proposing their confrontation with the mainstream society while cultivating dissensus and reinventing forms of being together, reconstructing public space every day. And for us, and that's the key point of why we are bringing this kind of weird people here, are a possible model for an architecture that is designed both to reflect, critique, and propose an alternative to the existing spatial models. That's a weird thing, right? But yeah, we think it is relevant for us and for architecture. Let's see why.
Then this project is the Gay Vatican, and it's a project intensely related with this kind of subcultures. It's the activator of an intentional community, elective community, counterfeit in the tradition of the Salton Lake communities like Salvation Mountain or Slav City, Biosphere to Drop City, or instant communities such as the Burning Man Festival, super well known. And Gay Vatican is an activator of an intentional community, as I said, which its development, as the original one, the Vatican in Rome, will be fostered by this huge public space. It is an enclave. Now it's a small thing in the drawing. It's an enclave similar to the gated communities around the golf courses for retired seniors in Palm Springs or Florida, to the gay communities placed in dedicated condos, and to the gated communities that are springing everywhere as a phenomenon of monocultural seclusion. It is located in the desolate 40-mile desert. In this site plan, this is the drawing, near the Route 95 all the way to Salt Lake City. And it sits on the physical ruins of an old private prison, and it's a huge circle surrounded by a perimeter of, it's a ring-shaped ditch that shelters the old underground distance of the prison. This Vatican, this enclave, is a circle with a series of inflatable structures that are constructed along the time in a sequence that starts in the outer ring, covering the underground cisterns, and progressively cover with water and with these structures that you are going to see. This is the down part, these structures that are pieces that shape the generation of their excessive and carnal forms, like the proper social group. And it's an inflation, the system is an inflation of large silicon membranes whose shape is defined by limiting their movement in lines and points on the surface, and afterwards they are inflated and stabilized with concrete using the silicon membranes as finishing, waterproofing, and formwork. To construct this weird mixture of different spaces, from workshops for the construction of the complex to gay saunas, gyms, small cathedrals, platform stages, discos, wedding chapels, of course, all serving as activators of the celebrations and events that happen at the same time. So in this project, and this is another drawing thought as a tool for the project, also these kind of things are consciously chosen. The discussion and the project turns around a social group or a specific subculture that of the homosexuals, that was the pioneer in the defense of the civil rights in the USA, in the States, here. So we always explain this project in Europe and not here. But now, well, we are trying to base every single decision of the project in its own peculiarities and culture and architecture in producing this architecture of micro-paradise that discusses the 60s utopias of free sex, the unconventional use of the historical languages, or even the discussion about the assimilation of typically straight values, all of them quite present in their own culture.
But why we are speaking about this? You would say, what is this people, presenting gay paradises, in forms of inflatable structures? Well, for the classical sociological reading of subcultures that was established basically in the 60s in UK youth, cultures were small spaces of resistance of the working class. For these subcultures, clothing and other signs of consume represented a symbolic way of expression and a negotiation of their identity. Let's say something which is really present in, or should be really present in architecture, which is the symbolic creativity, in their case, solved at the level of subculture, let's say, social and economic problems and resolved at the material level. Style, and particularly lifestyle, or the invention of alternative lifestyles and as a conscious and political choice, is central to the symbolic construction of their identity. Let's say, surprisingly, also for us, when we discovered this, was like shocking. The consumption of goods that we perceive as something quite banal and based on pure consumerism is a ritual and a strategy of resistance somehow. It's a conscious act, an elective and political practice against dominant and hegemonic culture.
And in this project, we were invited to construct a proposal for Gran Via Street in Madrid, and we proposed a scenario to discuss the methods of cultural material production of the city and the economical and political implications of the construction of the city through positive destruction processes. And for us, the most disturbing and interesting images about Gran Via are based on this destruction and fascinating scenario of order demolition overlapped with the normal life of an European capital that is not much more than one copy of the transformation of Paris undertaken by Haussmann during the Second Empire. In a process of forced displacement, the working masses were displaced to the periphery as an attempt to control the riots, facilitating the mobility of the police. His social engineer of a clinical order can be read as an example of what the Austrian economist Schumpeter called innovative process of destruction. For him, capitalism is nothing more than a constant process of creative reorganization regulated by cyclical periods of destruction. Then, understanding destruction through a positive point of view, releasing it of the negative charge, we propose to extend the process today and convert it into an anti-replica, looking for opportunities in the destruction of the urban fabric to make a reverse process of transformation in the city. And then we could celebrate the destructive processes and reverse construction and convert them into something creative and something to discuss the production of the city. Then 4 series of gigantic machines that eat buildings and defecate ecosystems transform the toxicity of the low-quality urban fabric. And the first one of them, is responsible for the defabrication of buildings and infrastructures, and is basically a logistic platform that perforate, tear, and separate the urban fabric, making use of the leftover construction machinery abandoned and left behind after the rising of the real estate crisis in Spain. So the roots of the machines produce this deconstruction and are linear disruption of the urban fabric that introduce in the city another geometry, while proposing a new productive model. Therefore, by stretching the idea of Haussmann in time, and turning it around and releasing it of any repressive attitude, the destruction could become an incubator of freedom spaces, an alternative to the toxicity and low-quality materiality of the more than 10 million square meters built in Spain during the previous 10 years before the crisis. So Madrid can be gradually destroyed and finished at the same time.
So basically this attitude of taking these kind of cultures as possible models is the alienating in our projects into this kind of sense of humor and irony as a subversive tool, and doing so a kind of sweet and positive activism emerges. Like the Gran Via project and this process that Cristina was explaining about the Haussmannization, subcultures are therefore a deforming mirror in front of our culture. that gives back its image, magnifying somehow its monstrosity, and at the same time proposing an exit door to the dominant cultural model. Taking these subcultures as possible contexts as models for our interventions, somehow reinject some element of everyday activities and culture into architecture, and take us beyond the generic abstract characterization of collective entities as people, working class, or multitudes so common in contemporary discourses, and help us to overcome the dilemma of pragmatism versus criticality. But then, apart from us, who are the other actors? The other actors, the invited actors that Christina was speaking about to this space that we are trying to construct throughout the buildings that we are projecting in the office. Who are, at the same time, the invited actors and the people who is constructing the action of these spaces? In the next two projects, we'll try to face the role of environments of synthetic nature that could facilitate a direct and horizontal relationship among different species. You will see how from the very most radical, let's say, most incredible projects, we're moving step by step towards the more, let's say, pragmatic ones, right? Trying to understand from more theoretical concerns to the really practical things, to everyday things in the office.
This is the Magic Mountain. It's a project that we did more than 12 years ago. And it's an ecosystem mask for a thermal power station in Iowa. That was the result of a competition for the refurbishment of the building. And we proposed in that moment to transform the building into a piece of landscape, into something alive, a living mountain that is not just a cosmetic assembly and of materials. And we propose to use a membrane of roses that construct the skin that wraps the building as a single common material. And the species for the construction were these rosebud creepers against a green background of honeysuckle, using the immense genetic material developed by one professor, Griffith Buck, who was born and lived in Ames in that city, and who grew many, many species of roses adapted to the climate. And establishing a starting color pattern, the colors change depending on the years, and the membrane attracts the butterflies and birds that are in the main, well, Ames is in the main migration route of the butterflies and birds in the States. And therefore the building would have been transformed into a real mountain where these birds can nest, attracted by the water tanks and this vertical garden. And the result is an ecosystem subjected to human interaction, so buildings, roses, and human, using gardeners' techniques and genetic selection to construct this image. And this is a film that we did 2 years after that for the Biennale of Venice, and it's a trip through this vertical garden. It's kind of how a trip just crossing and visiting the wrapping of roses. And well, the building was thought as an extension of the university where Bach was teaching, transforming it into a laboratory of genetic engineering where different species and varieties of roses could have been developed to resist diseases or climatic extremes and to test different colors and sizes. And then architecture could have been understood as a natural monument, artificially generated, but also as an energy infrastructure and architecture that can be converted into a living system. Could have been.
But human and animal relations have been charged with power, usually an oppressive and dominating power by humans over animals. And usually animals have been like the powerless, and the marginalized other partner in human and animal relations. Their ethical invisibility enabled humans to manipulate, exploit, displace, and consume animals constantly, and many animals somehow have their own territories to which they are adapted. But what happens when animals are forced to convey with human spatial ordering? In some cases, some spatial orderings are created exclusively for human and animal interaction, like this fascinating Indian temple that is basically thought to shelter just rats, where rats are constantly fed with milk and aliments, you know, in where in where you are supposedly blessed whenever you are touched by a rat. But commonly, these spaces are replicated simply. The spaces of the animals in our societies replicate some only or usually those of the humans, and fixing animals into our spatial orderings, like the zoo you can imagine, you know, the farm, the slaughterhouse, and the laboratory. Only few species do have the capacity to transgress the imagined and materially constructed spatial orderings of human societies, and only on a relatively small scale, animals have been able to evade this domination and usually are persecuted because of that, you know, as the plagues. And well, the next project is about creating a common territory for humans and animal kind of interaction, a shared space and a place for exploring new ways of interaction between human and animals, as I was you know, explaining.
And it's called Black Cloud, and it's placed in the Testaccio mountain in Rome. And well, it's a gigantic open cage that connects the former slaughterhouse of Rome with the leftover amphorae pile of the Testaccio mountain, considered the hill number 8 in Rome, and situated in the south part of the Tevere River. And well, Testaccio is a wild, maybe you know it, is a wild and weird place that accumulates discos in night restaurants and also workshops excavated in the amphorae landfill. And as I mentioned, or a friend mentioned, the project discusses the relationship among humans and post-natural species directly or indirectly modified by humans, such as plagues or domestic animals. And is the most visible part of a larger project planned by the municipality of Rome and the FAO, and financed with European funds and hosted in 2 of the buildings of the former slaughterhouse, following the efforts of various institutions to collect the animal and vegetal genetic resources around the globe, aiming to preserve the diversity of indigenous breeds and crops. So the initial project consisted on a bridge that linked the slaughterhouse with the artificial hill that cannot be visited during the poor stability, because of the poor stability of the slopes, but it is an excellent place to have this the archive, because of the temperature and humidity conditions are very homogeneous. And the bridge evolved into a huge aviary for the flight of the birds. So excavated in the hill, you can see the most hidden part of the institution, that is the archive that gathers in a buried columbarium the genetic material of animal species modified by humans. And the open cage is an artificially cut off of these starlings, an invasive species considered by international institutions as a plague. And during the annual migrations, thousands of them arrive to Rome and produce these beautiful black clouds, these ever-changing flocks that maybe you know, but they also pollute the city with their droppings. And well, the starlings in 2010 were 600 million, and the number is 10% of the human population. And the aim of the project then is learning from traditional bird traps, construct a huge and open basket to attract them and to construct them a huge nest, providing a resting place suitable for them to rest and fly. So the space inside is long enough to allow the starlings fly, and the edges are organized as traps and also are organized for people. And well, this hybrid aviary is based on a system like those developed by Leroy Collet, the French engineer, that is a central bearing compression and stress exterior members. And the piece, as I said, replicate the geometric condition of the big trees of the Tevere River, where the starlings can nest and have some rest, and the clusters of bunching ends respond in a different way to both edges conditions. Some are only for birds, and some are for humans, like this extension of the terraces of the restaurants and the discos that are nowadays in the Testaccio. So what was the former slaughterhouse, that was the site of the suffering of animals, could be now inhabited by a plague and convert it into a palace for post-natural species.
So the term third nature that gives name to this publication and most of the work that we have been working with in the last 5 years, both in the academia and the office, it was originally coined by this guy. It's not by us, sorry. A guy called Jacobo Faria, maybe you know him, during the first quarter of the 16th century, and was defined. Third nature was defined as a counterpoint to first and second nature. Was coined to refer to a new reality that was happening or was appearing in that moment. There were the new Renaissance gardens. It's a very well-known, kind of story, well pointed out and well explained by some historians, and that we're having a new and non-expected material condition, something in between natural and man-made. Obviously, as you have been seeing, is something that interests us. But not only this, something that fascinates us is that what is maybe most important for us is that these gardens were culturally produced and received. Remember that the reference to the classical culture and the mythology were crucial in these gardens to understand them and to perceive them properly. So these gardens, somehow, on the idea of the third nature, establish new culturally constructed relationships, not only with nature, but also with technology and history to define spaces with a radically new materiality somehow.
And this project tries to redefine the relationship of an inner space for events with the popular culture. And this is the Jerte Valley, a typical valley from the geographical point of view that has become a very well-known place in Spain due to the monoculture that covers all its surface.
The cherry tree is cultivated here since the 14th century, and it is almost the only tree that grows all over the valleys since the 18th century. And since then has transformed the landscape due to that it's cultivated basically in terraces defined by stone walls or with the width of one tree or one of these cherry trees. So it has been transformed in the entire valley. It has 11 villages, and in recent years the Jerte cherry monoculture has become a touristic attraction in springtime. Why? Because of that, a continuous blanket of white flowers that entirely covers the valley, producing this surreal kind of like landscape. So we enter the competition, and the brief asked for a convention center. It exactly was a theater and a convention center. But for us, there is nothing more absurd than blindly import models and design for locational purposes. Because the fiesta that is held there, or is held there, is something in between this pilgrimage, this cheesy pilgrimage of El Rocío held in the south part of Spain, and that crosses the most important natural park of the peninsula. Or could we define something in between this pilgrimage or the haptic and collective space of an Ibiza disco, or even a contemporary rave, or even something in between these things, in even a traditional celebration of the landscape and the goods that it produces. Everything between traffic jams and cherry trees, you can imagine a kind of surreal and incredible mixture of things and completely different nature. So for us, it was kind of weird to really think about, a theater or a convention center in there, right? So thinking about these kind of things permit us to introduce something that is usually forgotten in most of the approaches to architecture, which is people, and it allows us to refocus architecture basically on people and everyday acts of each person in the social manifestation, even in most extreme, that mainly happen in this counterpart of the daily routine, as you are seeing here in the Tomatina, in the southeast part of Spain. Then, as we were explaining, space is constructed not only by inert or natural materials, but also through the actions of the user, like in this project by one of our students in London. So for the project, for this project, we try to get all these things together, basically.
And we propose to construct a space completely interiorized, an haptic dome, I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry, where the space can be really choreographed and perceived as in a cathedral or in a church or as in a disco or in Ibiza or in a rave. So a dome where the big variety of different activities of the festival can be sheltered from the religious coming from the feast related with food and the celebration of the landscape. And at the same time, the interior space is defined by big halls connected with the exterior in a selected way, entrances, and also views, and of course sunlight connections. And therefore, for the Cherry Blossom Festival, what we proposed is the construction of a contemporary chapel, a building that establishes a close bond with the landscape through the presence, position, volume, and material, and their material. So, like a church for pilgrims, this building is the chapel that floats in the landscape and is related with a huge scale of the whole valley and the 11 villages, and is an assertive building that uses the scale to establish this point of reference in the valley during the fiesta. Although it's really small, it's 1,000 square meters, it's really a small thing. It dominates this big landscape, and it will be the future assembly of natural and artificial elements like nature, animals, cherry trees, tourists, and inhabitants all together. And our proposal for the landscape, that is always changing in color during the year, is from green to white in spring, to red in autumn, to brown in winter, is a ceramic building with large shining tiles that provides a contrast with the changes in color of the valley along the seasons and the mists and the changing weather conditions. And the building is organized around a central space surrounded by a concrete ring occupied in the upper level with a mezzanine. And this is the concrete ring under construction, the ground plan, and the basement under construction, and well, what we call the crypt, that is all the system of rooms that are underneath. You can see some images of these rooms of the crypt underneath. And the space, the inner space is connected with the surroundings through the basement level, the crypt, as I said, and also through a big ramp that leads directly to the upper level. This is the foyer. Before entering to the dome, this will be the dome, and this is a huge ramp, consciously out of scale, enormous ramp that goes directly to the upper part.
Just upon this concrete ring that you are seeing, you know, as almost the only piece that has been already constructed there, there is the steel and ceramic dome, as you can see in the section, right? And you're seeing there, you know, the foyer that is surrounding, you know, the big space where this mezzanine is situated, and the big holes, you know, where through them the light is entering in the space. So, you know, this ceramic dome is composed basically by a non-structural lower part, which covers the concrete ring, and an upper part, which is basically composed by small steel bars and plates that ensures kind of similar behavior of a dome. But as Cristina was explaining, you know, there are like these big holes, you know, disrupting, you know, the surface of the dome and the structural behavior of it. And, you know, you can imagine what happens, you know, when you know, a hole which is not meant to be, you know, in the place that it should be, is disrupting, you know, this kind of structural behavior, supposedly that of a dome, right? So basically, the discontinuity that was produced by these holes was sorted out somehow whenever the surface is interrupted, just bending in this way, you know, the surface of the dome, and being capable to manipulate and to modulate the light entering inside the space, and also modulating the lighting condition, and also introducing a stiffness whenever it's needed in the surface of the dome, right? And basically, you know, because of that, these holes, these kind of immense lanterns, stabilize the structural behavior of it. and also deforming and transforming the tessellation of the surface of the dome. Because the problem of the tessellation of this surface is a really important one, right? And that can't be done by digital means. We were forced to really draw every single thing by hand, trying to define the geometry of the tessellation of the dome, as you can see. The interior is a big room, understood a three-dimensional structure of interwoven steel plates, as you can see, that ensure, as I was explaining, the similar behavior of that of a dome. There are only 60 mil steel bars, really thin ones that are like growing towards or inwards the interior of the dome. They are joined together. There are multiple problems related with the geometry of the surface, and we decided to use these slender plates, to really ensure that are like deformed, to follow the normal, the perpendicular lines to every single point in the surface. As you are seeing here in the part that is already constructed there. This is replicated towards the inside of the dome with a mosaic of rhomboid figures that serve to fine-tune the acoustics of the hall, creating this wall around all the feast with this light as modulated by the holes.
So, one politician one day in Extremadura promised an auditorium, and the competition was that exactly is. They wanted to have an auditorium, but this strange hybrid cannot be called a theater or an auditorium anymore, because neither the urban typological models for the halls, nor the events that take place in that kind of buildings, nor the definition, like the organization, form, or even material definition, mean anything for this case, because this building is going to be closed mainly the whole year and open only for the fiesta for several days, maybe 1 week, or for several festivals, but in the same way as a church on a pilgrimage day is only open during very short periods of time. So it's a weird typology, it's a rare new species. And this is the last project that we are going to show you today. That is the building that I said when we started that is already finished. And if you open the book, in the letter R, you can find rooms around the garden. That was a winning entry 10 years ago, in 2004, and was based on the recovery of an existing site with memory, very important memory, and the restoration of 2 buildings that are, well, nowadays are already there, refurbished. One is Giner de los Ríos' house, his own house, and one is Macpherson Pavilion. You will see both in the pictures. And the competition wanted to construct a new extension also for the institution. It's called Institución Libre de Enseñanza, Institution for Free Education.
This Institución Libre de Enseñanza was set up in 1876 as a constantly evolving experimental laboratory for new teaching methods. So something related with pedagogy, right? Something that in places like this we are experiencing, on an everyday basis. And it was led by a group of university professors, that you are seeing them, some of them, among them, Giner de los Ríos, that is in the center of the image. And all of them were convinced of the necessity of the deep reform of the Spanish society and generally of different societies through the education. And they decided to quit the university and started by their own a new project called Institución Libre de Enseñanza, based on the reform and the modernization of the country, based on the education of children. That's that fascinating thing that started in this place. Was the place where several Nobel Prize receivers were studying when they were children. A whole generation called the 27th generation. It was the most important one in Spanish culture in the 20th century, maybe in several centuries. that was taken over by the dictatorship after the civil Spanish War and were basically destroyed. You know, so you can imagine what was happening with all the descendants of these people that were studying there. They were in exile in Mexico and different countries. So the project, basically, of Giner de los Rios Foundation, that is the name that receives now this institution, plays with a delicate and dense lattice of invisible relationships between, you know, these people, basically, the intellectual and material legacy of the foundation, and the something which is really difficult to explain. You only experience when you have this kind of intense relationship with the client. Something that is the sentimental projection of a group of people with this living piece of the Spanish intellectual history. You know, the working material is something so sensible. It's related with this thing of that we were speaking about. That is a common identity, a common culture. Let's say even a small social group that is could be called as well kind of subculture. Believe me, that has in a spirit something that is a common belief and a particular way of feeling and thinking. Let's say. How we try to reproduce this, basically trying to reflect the vision of nature and landscape of Giner de los Rios, its founder. It is perhaps one of the first and most important Spanish contribution to the modern concept of landscaping. For him, landscape was one of the most important educational tools. You know, something that was kind of based on the excursions that he was doing with the children to the nearby mountains in Madrid was one of the main tools for him to teach them. He was interested in a kind of would sound quite contemporary somehow, but it was like, you know, all these concepts were set up in the late 19th century. Was interested in a multisensorial approach to nature and as well and as an equal to equal, and these are his words, relationship with it based on this kind of physical kind of perception of the natural environment. And also the understanding of a landscape as a cultural fact, something which is at the same time the result of a culture and that has to be perceived through this culture. And also, again, these words are taken directly from his writings.
Well, the project is based on the recreation of the spatial organization of this historic headquarters, and it's a series of elevated pieces and classrooms that, in words of Giner de los Rios, are surrounded by a belt of greenery and process the ideal of the institución libre enseñanza, of approaching to the closest extent possible to outdoor life, providing, and this is really beautiful, at least 1 cubic meter of air to each child. And therefore, our project is basically not a building, it's basically a garden. So it's a garden with a collection of rooms, outdoor and indoor rooms. And well, of course, this is the garden, and the collections of rooms are here. You will see more very soon. Therefore, the target is inverted in this project. The garden is the main space to be defined with the actions, and whilst the new building and the existing ones become just what configure the space of the garden. And rather than a frozen final image, this work, this project work with processes based on management system, combination of irrigation, mulching and composition of soils and greenery and so on. And the result is simple and free from geometry and figures. And is defined not only by the changing colors of the plants, but also by the reflections of the surfaces and the overlap layers, the vegetation, the lattice, the glasses, and the building structures. And also the garden is extended in the upper parts of the levels of the buildings. It's a three-dimensional garden.
So, well, everything in this garden is basically, as we explained with the third nature STEM, is everything decided based on the particular culture of this institution. The path that this is a kind of drawing that shows, you know, the construction of the space of the garden, right? That is following a path of, you know, the darker points are the let's say the steps, let's call them like this, of a path that crosses the garden and defines, the volumetry of the project of the building as a background and as a necessary background for the garden, so that the garden and the building itself are intrinsically linked. And everything, as I was saying, is decided based on the particular culture of the institution. This path that is replicating an existing path that was in that only we know it by the writings. A path that was in the shape of an S that was crossing the existing garden. To the species chosen for it, and there are all of them taken from the written description of the existing garden was destroyed after the Civil War. The position and size of the rooms are also defined by the eyes by our eyes in movement. So as we walk through the garden, according to, as you are seeing in this drawing, to the visual cones in accordance to the new proposed path, following this shape of the S. This is a drawing that we did for the competition. It was the first drawing that we did was this thing, right? Trying just to draw a new S and trying to define your position whenever you are crossing the garden, defining, the rooms and the openings of the garden. If we consider, therefore, our eyes instead of as screens that are just receiving information and collecting information of our surroundings as a kind of projectors that are able to shape the garden around, then somehow you will get this thing, right? Constructing diagonals to open up the garden. So it's a really tiny plot in the city, only 1,000 square meters, and the client asked us to construct 5,000. So, and we propose the client to construct a garden big enough, right? So it's a kind of difficult thing. So we were like matching one each other with these kind of eyes that were projecting, and shaping the building and the garden at the same time. So the external facades of the pavilions and the new building, wide and narrow the inner space in order to reveal in a selective way different parts of the garden and construct these long visual diagonals that you saw, which expand perceptually the size of it. Right? The cladding is at the same time a garden facade, a lattice, let's call it like that, in kind of normal terms, and a facade towards the interior as well, to the classrooms. It's a kaleidoscope of changing kind of geometries that basically expands the size of the garden, right? Throughout the reflections, throughout the the position of the volumes, and is composed out of a multiplicity, as you will see, of steel bars. It's a kind of geometric kaleidoscope of surfaces that expands, as I was saying, somehow the garden. It's a pretty small one if you see the plan, but it's perceptibly it's really huge. That the lattice as well acts as a filter to the classrooms and modulates the views and serves as a transition between the outdoor natural elements and the indoor artificial constructed, spaces in the interior. As a light veil, it's also the density of the elements fits according to sunlight exposure. There are like 1,000 different panels. None of them is equal to another. And all of them are having different densities. Maybe you're perceiving subtle differences that allowed us to filter the views and also filter the views from inside the classrooms, and also to block the direct sun radiation in the interior of the classrooms, to improve the energy efficiency of the facade, obviously, and to hide and expose the classrooms to the garden. The lattice is kind of this kind of things that only you can do in Spain. In countries like Spain, where still there is a craftsmanship, but at the same time there is a level of industrialization that allow us to make this thing that is composed out of 3 layers of really thin steel bars that is like a typical reinforcement for kind of for a concrete foundation, but without the corrugation. It has no frames, as you are seeing or you saw before, and they are like linked together by these brackets among them. the steel structure is placed, in between the glass of the classrooms that you will see now and the steel lattice. And it's a system of slender plates and cantilevers that are attached to the concrete slabs situated between the layers of the cladding in order to basically to hide them or to hide the structure perceptively.
Now the classrooms, so the interior spaces, are kind of multifocal spaces with no predominant direction and are surrounded by enclosure of curved glass and a system of curtains that allow to modify the acoustics and lighting conditions. So mainly those are the classrooms, and this is a thick wall, the perimeter. And in the program, the classrooms should have different sizes, and our proposal is based on the construction of a system of them, whose geometry, different sizes and groupings permit different configurations of the space, and therefore the space becomes also into an educational tool as well, due to the open possibilities of the system, and understanding also and perceiving the classroom as an extension of the garden. Then the new building can be defined as a thick, specialized dividing wall, that is this wall, dividing wall, a hollow perimeter wall that shelters different side room that widen and narrow this space, that is the inner public working space, and it's a deep wall also that is transformed along the perimeter in order to shelter the staircases, the elevators, the toilets, the installations, and even the receptacle of the collection of the Fundación Giner de los Ríos, with an exhibition system of hidden drawers and shelves in the wall and connecting vertically different spaces. So now, to finish, we are about to enter in the building, and we are going to lead you following the inner path throughout the garden, so the DS, and the construction of the shape through the movement of our eyes along the garden. We always explain to our students that our eyes are not watching our surroundings, are not seeing our surroundings. Our eyes are projecting our surroundings. We project what we are seeing. So this drawing is, again, another drawing trying to represent what we are projecting, how the interior of this garden was constructed, trying to break it into fragments and open diagonals. So this is what you can see from outside in the street. You can see only 10% of the building, nothing, almost nothing. And this is Giner de los Ríos house, is a traditional small house, very domestic. Then when you enter through a very narrow and compressed access, and you start walking, and then you start discovering this DS-shaped path that crosses the interior space and starts revealing the rooms behind the different densities of the lattice. And then the diagonals that open up the space of the garden and break the building into pieces with your eyes projecting them, in order to perceive the space as this collection of, not an understanding the building as a big building, but a collection of rooms that are living inside this garden. And if we look backwards for a while, we can see again this tall tower that we saw in the street, and the entrance to the garden. And because towards Martinez Campos Street, the system is bigger and transformed and adapted to the urban scale. And if we look now to the rear part of the garden again, we find a huge stair that drives us to the excavated and secret auditorium that is underneath the building. And the footprint projection, it is the footprint projection of the upper garden. And generates this multifocal auditorium that is conformed by a landscape of spaces for public events that looks to the main stages. So again, a system of spaces that look to the main stage through these large holes that look like strabismic eyes. We call them the eyes, and act as a bearing beams where the loads of the upper pillars are held. And these rooms can be open or closed to expand the auditorium. Now we go out again, upstairs, and we see the layout of the facade. That is the plan of the auditorium, and that is also an outdoor auditorium for public events, where the garden is converted into vertical layer to be part of the lattice in this second part of the garden. If we turn around and look backwards, we see Giner de los Rios' house, and we see Macpherson Pavilion living in the garden now, and places to read or staircases that, if we go up, we can perceive again the three-dimensionality nature of the garden.
Which is very young, of course. It's only 6 months, so it's going to be much more exuberant than it looks now in the photographs. So, therefore, the project tries at the same time to install itself with what we call the sentimental geography of the institution and also their ideology, carefully weaving the threads of relationship between the people, this group of people that is still alive, and their descendants, and the mature intellectual legacy of the institution in order to build an evocation of the institution spirit without an uncritical, or let's call it self-indulgent conservation of the past. Okay, just to finish. Until now was mentally easy and comprehensible to divide, for us, even for us, our world into technological objects, nature and humans, categorizing them in architecture through terms as durability, utility, or using them as idealistic realms that lead somehow the work, of us architects. But nowadays, for us, the most interesting field of work is the field of interaction between things, what Bruce Sterling used to call the space of the technosocial. And our main aim is to produce these third natures as assemblies or complex ecologies, as you saw, that function as mechanisms of interaction between living beings, social groups, and technological objects, and they stood as complex and bizarre amalgams, these kind of third natures, this amalgam of materials from different backgrounds in which the origin of the different elements is completely, absolutely relevant as it happens in our culture. Something amidst humans, understanding building something as amidst humans and non-humans, and technological objects, but also, taking into account, the particular cultures of social groups. Everything working in the space in between things and trying to produce, as engineers of artificial paradises that assemble of kind of strange materials into new compounds, a new public realm in which architecture can have a cultural ambition and a festal commitment. Iñaki mentioned at the very beginning why this strange name, and that's the reason. Because we are interested in constructing something together, first of all, between both of us, something that is constructed not only by architecture, but also inhabited, which might sound kind of conventional, but we do think that is still relevant between people, nature, living beings, and technologies.
So now it's time to close the book and this micropedia of strange new natures. And we would like to say, to finish, saying thank you for coming and thank you for listening. These were rare new things. We know that sometimes are kind of not easy to understand and sometimes are kind of cheesy maybe. But thank you for listening, and hopefully we have been able to explain it, even though this is not my voice, I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now?
Yeah, I think that we have very few minutes very few minutes for questions and answers. It's a little bit too late.
It's too late, no?
But
We have been speaking too much, huh?
Well,
no matter.
mostly everyone coming here speaks too much. No, I just want to begin to say that you have mentioned a word that comes from the archaeological field, which is material culture, that I think is very relevant way to enter into your system of thinking and drawing and designing. No? So the idea that context is not exclusively the physical context, but it's a kind of thing that you can understand through understanding not only the social groups, but also the objects and the everyday life instruments that they surround the life of people, and construct a culture of a specific site through this kind of analysis. No? And I think that this is something that is relevant for many reasons. It's relevant because it informs us of time in relationship with what you see, and it's relevant because it informs us of let's say, the objective factors that condition the life of people, like climate or like wealth or the wealthy state of the culture in different moments. No? So I just want to say that in a way this relationship that you establish among designing and this material culture is filtered in any case. I mean, this is the explanation you have given, but what we see through your beautiful drawings is that you are using extensively patterns that are stylistically constructed. In a way, I mean, what I have missed in your explanation is the role of this kind of very subjective way to represent, to construct with certain geometries, certain kind of doodles, angles, etc., etc. Can you elaborate a little bit this in relationship with material culture? Or
Well,
it's always difficult, no? But
it is always difficult because it belongs also to the unconscious part, you know, that tries to analyze things in the real world, tries to connect your work with which is basically our obsession nowadays, right? Trying to connect the things that we are doing with the real world, with the world outside, trying to understand what is happening around us, trying to understand our own culture, and all kind of problems, and trying to integrate it somehow in the everyday designing practices, right? Through our drawing. So, but the filtering of this information, which is, as you saw, mainly by images and by the media, is done throughout, you know, processes that deals with drawing and making models, you know, something that belongs to the culture of architecture. And it's filtered through the particular culture, which is the culture of architects as well. Which that is, I don't know if it was clear enough, quite important for us as well, you know, even though we didn't explain anything about it. And somehow there is something that we usually cultivate, let's say like this, which is the not the total enclosed and completely constructed relationship of the intentions and the shapes and the forms, trying to give some room to the unexpected, you know. So basically what is happening is that, yeah, there are like patterns, shapes, and so on. Well, but we have this kind of a strange tendency of trying to fight against them at the same time, right? So, but we would like to see the things that we are constantly doing as stylistically non-consistent things, but at the end they are. And they're perfectly...
I like this explanation. I think that is very objective. I mean, I mean, this is happening to almost all of us, and in many ways this is why we don't used to emphasize these aspects, because it looks like too narcissist or too personal. Yeah, but at the same time, there's always a kind of, you have to recognize, I mean, everyone has to recognize, even those that presume that their method of design is super objective and out of their kind of style is a bad word or something like that. No? I think that this relationship of how do you inform your project, how do you try to connect with the world, and how do you and at the same time you recognize that this is a signature. I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't know why in a way architects have this kind of pudor to avoid this discussion, while when other artists, writers basically are always about the style. If you don't have a style, you are nothing. No, I mean,
well, let me explain something, right? That might sound quite as well kind of naive, right? But it's true. You know, in our case, we started to have a look to these kind of weird things that belong to our own personal interests, that are like social groups, cultures, you know, something which is related with the world around that we like, we enjoy, and we kind of practice in our personal lives, because we thought that there were a huge influence, you know, in this unconscious way of producing and doing things, right? And, you know, because basically we were looking at certain things that were transmitted and they were informing these things, and we thought, okay, we have to have a look to these things, because otherwise we'll be like, you know, being influencing the work that we are doing without having a kind of conscious kind of notion and understanding of it. And funny thing is what we discovered at the end of the day was a different reality than we expected. And it was a more fascinating thing, but it didn't allow us to understand why we were like. So, you know, it's like really, it's for us the mental process that leads the work every day, and then it's in stylistic patterns, kind of shapes, forms, recurrent things that are happening within the projects. Honestly, still difficult to control, and let me say that we don't want to control them totally.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, I think it sounds like banal, but I think it's a key. Let's a key discussion. Yeah. Can we open the discussion a minute, Colin? Can there's someone there? Okay.
Yeah, I have a maybe question, but maybe it's more of a comment. I was noticing throughout the presentation there's a recurring image, and that's the image of the bulb. It's sort of like a flower bulb or something. They're in the aviary, they sort of end in these sort of bulbous ends, and there's sort of throughout the project the bulb returns. And I was thinking about it, it's interesting that it's sort of a thing that happens within a natural system, these bulbs, but it's also the moment where whatever's happening in the system concentrates into something that's individual or recognizable as individual. So I'm just wondering, I guess, what do you think about bulbs? Or have you thought about bulbs? Or does...
You?
Anything to say?
No, never.
No, you know what? I mean, you know, going directly maybe to something that when we were students we were very much interested in, that is how things are happening within the drawing, you know, board. Basically how shapes are coming out, where are they coming from, and how they appear, what is the process of emergence in this kind of things. Basically, that is absolutely something that fascinates us. So what we usually do in the office on an everyday basis is doing like, the office is producing like 1,000 models a day, but models and models that are like from the very first beginnings of the projects are intuitively done by a lot of people, different people, and in a completely unconscious way, trying to, you know, with the research process about, you know, site conditions, context, and, you know, cultural facts and all these things that we were speaking about, trying to analyze them and trying to get to a kind of conclusion what is fitting better, you know, in this kind of control context. So without preconceiving, you know, what kind of shapes, what kind of forms, what kind of patterns, what kind of things could be, you know, fitting better. And doing as well like lots and lots of drawings, you know, basically also trying to vary in the array of kind of tools that we are, not tools, but ways of approaching the problem in different ways, right? And trying to analyze why certain things are more suitable for the project. So it's not a kind of objective way, but trying to trial and error kind of really big range of trial and error processes that somehow collapses in something that, let's say democratically, everyone in the office says, I don't know, I mean, but this is everyday thing in the office, and it says, I don't know why this is fitting in the problem. This is absolutely collapsing all the things that we were speaking. And that's the thing. And well, under recurrent things. Yep. But honestly, we are not the ones that are totally unconsciously leading the processes. So it's something that we really like in the process that we are doing nowadays. I don't know if I answered.
Any other? Well, then, I think it's really late. Thank you so much. It has been an impressive. I'm sure that those of you that didn't know their work are astonished by this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.